Since the disassembly of this bike, I have taken apart, cleaned, and rebuilt these carburetors, adjusted the valves, and fixed several other things on this motorcycle, but now it's time to put it all back together. So let's get started. It's now an appropriate time to remove the paper towel that has been sitting in the intakes to stop contaminants from getting into the engine. Use a little bit of rum oil on my fingers and lubricate both of these seals before I put the carburetors in. It'll make this process a lot easier. The side's going to seat. I lubricate that too. Flip it over, do the other side. So when the carb goes in, this bracket here with the throttle linkage is going to be on the left, just like that. I flip the handlebars in the opposite direction from how the bike would normally be in the resting position to give myself some room. Negotiate the carburetor into position in here. It's not to get it connected to the bike. You just want to get it through, gently work it through past all these hoses and stuff so it's sitting in here. This is it. This is all I wanted to accomplish. I just wanted to get it into the side and have it laying here inside between the frame. So I'm going to work the front one in first. That's always easy. I'll rock that into place. There we go. The front one's already in. And the back one, I'm just going to up and down and push it. Now the back one's in, right? So now that I've got them both in, make sure they seat nicely. Just give them a little wiggle back and forth like that. Should have a little play. And I can see that it's seated and everything's really nice. So now the carburetor is seated in the intake manifolds. The carbs are in place and this step is now completed. You'll notice that on the screws that tighten the manifold gaskets to the carburetor, there is a metal ring around it that gives it the right amount of separation, also allows you to tighten down that screw. So you can tighten it a bit. You shouldn't over tighten it, but it allows for that possibility. Also, there is a notch that sets the location of where this band sits. So keep in mind that this cannot rotate. See right there below the that metal insert. While it's loose, it is possible to jump that notch, so keep it in mind. So now it's tight, and I'll give it a little tighten. There we go. It's done. Same applies for the other cylinder as well. A little tighten and done. I'm going to wash these hoses inside and out now and then give it a light oiling on the outside before they're put back on the bike. We can see that this hose has a key in it right over here, and that key locks in here, and that sets the position of this hose so it sits in the right direction once it's installed. Furthermore, we could also see that the hose has keys for the brackets to hold those in position. It's really easy. You just drop the hose down from the top. We set it right into place so it seats, and we can see the key is locked in. Then we tighten down the bracket with a Phillips screwdriver. Once that screw is tightened, we could go and then look into the hose and verify that it is seated up nicely against the carburetor, and we can see that it is. So this hose is done. On to the next one. As a matter of convenience, before I put the next hose in, I'm just going to loom these wires in this bracket right here, so that they're out of the way. Now I'm going to attach this hose in the same manner as I did the last one. Just lock it into place so that these line up. Check that that little positioning notch lines up and tighten it down. Generally not a terrible idea to put some paper towel in these pipes if you're not immediately going to close this up, so you don't get any garbage or dust or whatever down there. Now we'll install the fuel line going to the carb, and then the locking clip. There you go. Now I'll reconnect these electrical connections right here. Make sure everything's tucked under. And that's it. Next we're going to reconnect the enrichener, or the choke, whatever you want to call it. I have an aftermarket cable, but the premise is the same. Basically, you're going to reinsert this piece first into the unit, and then we're going to worry about staging it. This is done by pulling back and engaging it first so you have room to work. Once it's in and through, the end just needs to be secured in here to be held in place. It's secured down, and you can see that the end butts up against this here to stop it from going any further forward. And it can be just tested by going like this and checking down at the carb to see how it's working. This is working just fine. It's not binding. So we move on to the next step. The most important thing that you want to check for in all of this is that when the choke is all the way off, is that there's just at least a little bit of slack in this cable. What you don't want is something set up wrong where the choke is always slightly engaged. It's going to cause a lot of problems. So you can see that this is just fine. Next is the throttle cables, and hopefully when you loosen them, you only loosen them to take them off and you didn't change any of the adjustments for the length on the bottom. So they'll be easy to put back in. If not, you're going to have to readjust. So in this one, I'm retightening the top screw, and this one, I'm retightening the bottom screw. We can see everything is back in place. As you tighten it, you got to hold the cable in position up top here, or it's just going to spin as you turn the wrench. Same for this side. I always put a cable tie here on this one to stop this bolt from coming loose. Now I reconnect my other fuel line, just like that. And this 3-piece clip that goes around the 2 throttle cables and the choke cable goes right down here on these 3 pieces. Holds them all together. This is now part of a standard VSTAR, but these filters are ready to be washed and re-oiled. My filters have been cleaned and dried, and I'm going to re-oil them now. I'll give them about 10 or 15 minutes to wick and reevaluate if they're going to need more oil after that. Now, before you go and put your fuel tank back on, after going through all this trouble to rebuild these carburetors and clean out all of that garbage, you may have all of that garbage still sitting inside the fuel system. You have a line that goes from the tank all the way back down to the pump on the other side of the bike, and then from the pump comes up to 2 separate hoses to the carbs. One is on this side, one is on the other side. Residual fuel sitting in there. When you hook these back up and turn on the bike, even with fresh gas, it's still going to pump all that crap right into the bowls, right? So maybe you want to take the time to flush the fuel system, and that's why I've disconnected this. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to disconnect both sides of these hoses to the carbs, and we're going to plug one side. And what I'm going to do with this side is I'm simply going to stick the smooth side of a drill bit in here, and then just put this clamp over it, right? Just like that. So it's liquid tight, snapped it right back into position here. And then on the other side, I'm going to connect a hose to that existing hose from the carb and put it into a container for collection. We can now see I've disconnected the hose that goes to this carb, and I've connected it to a gas can. Here's the hose that goes to the actual gas tank. What I'm going to use is a small gas tank that I use for testing, and fill it with fresh gas and temporarily connect it right here and seat it right on top of the frame. I hope you're using 87, because if you're not, send me a donation, because if you're going to waste your money, you might as well be sending it to me. You can replace the fuel filter. It is located just under here, these 2 tabs and this rubber bracket. You can remove it from this rubber connector right here. It'll pull right up, remove these 2 tabs, pop in a new one, and you're done. Having this all set up, I can now take my key, put it in the ignition, and turn it on. You'll hear a noise followed by fuel flowing into the can. You can also hear it once you shut it off too, it'll continue to flow. So I'll begin. And it cuts off. So if you want to resume, you can shut off the ignition, hit it again. I believe this is all sufficiently purged now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this hose back on the carb, because I know that this is all clean, and it'll fill up the bowl is what it's going to do. And I'm going to move this gas can over to the other side, do the same process. This hose is back on, and I've moved to this side to repeat the process. Now that the fuel system is flush, I'll run it one last time to fill this bowl. Eventually that noise will stop when fuel stops flowing, because the carbs will stop the movement of fuel, and then I'll know that everything is filled and all the air is purged. time to pull out the paper towel. Still good paper towel, use it for something else. Now I'm checking for leaks, because if there are any leaks, this is all for nothing. This is a very important step. Now that the bowls are filled with gasoline, take your time. Make sure nothing is leaking before you proceed. If it's leaking, you got to rip it out, see why it's leaking, and fix it. Hour later, everything is dry as a bone. See that carb there? You can look down in this carb here. Still gas in the tank. So we're gonna close her up. This is good. So now I'll be lowering my pods back on. A stock bike would be lowering on the air silencer. Both the pods and the airbox screw into the same bracket right here. This is a Phillips head screw. So they're both tightened down. The breather hose can be connected right over here in the locking clip. And that's done. At this point, we're going to put the gas tank back on the bike. This is one of the pieces that I wait to clean after it's on the bike. And the reason is because it always has to be handled and stuff everywhere until it's finally installed, and it just gets dirty again while doing that, so I don't even bother. First order of business is to coat these rubber brackets here with rem oil. Then I'll set the handlebar straight. Make sure I've pulled that fuel line out from that test position back to the fuel position so that I can hook it to the tank. Also, I keep a vacuum port here on this side. This is for balancing the carbs. This is a later step. I also have another one here that sits in my air filter, right? My unused air filter. So just keep that in mind as well. So in the first step, I simply laid the tank down the frame. I haven't done anything yet. I'm going to have to now get it so that I get the tracks within those brackets and walk it forward. When I do that, I'm going to want to lift up a little as I walk it forward. You use rem oil and there's nothing to it. Walks right up, no issues. We can see that it's up far enough because the holes line up. What we're going to do is we're going to connect this electrical harness right here, first and foremost. And there's a spot for it. So we're going to go and lift up the tank and lift this up. It's hard to do with one hand. I seem to have it under control, right? And then we're going to make it so that the tank falls down first and this box falls on top of it. Now I'm going to loosely drop in these screws here, but this is about as far as I'm going to go because I don't want to do too much work after this until we test out the motorcycle. By the way, now having gas in the tank, we can see that my repair from the fuel valve repair project has worked successfully. The fuel line is now connected, so turn it to the on position. Ready to fire up the bike, but before I do, I want to tie a piece of yarn around the timing chain tensioner right over here. And this will tell me if it's leaking from the base, leaking from the end, or leaking from both places, giving me an idea of what this repair is going to be. There you go, it's all that needed to be done. It could sit just like that. Now the idea was that during this job, the balance of the carburetors had not been changed, right? And we could see the balance screw is way down here. Now I have a carburetor synchronizer, so I have no problem to set these. That's why I have these tubes right here and on the other side to set up that synchronization. But there's a couple things. Number one is that the synchronization should only be done at full temperature. So it has to be synchronized enough to get the bike to run. That's why it's generally a good idea to never disturb the screw anyway. And number two, if you don't have a synchronizer, you're out of luck. You can't do this by ear. It just doesn't work. Also, I preemptively connected my synchronizer. I'm not going to be reading it until the bike is warmed up, but there's no need not to connect it now while it's cold. You see one side's connected to here, and I use electrical tape just to make sure it doesn't leak. The other side's connected to here. So here goes nothing. I'm going to give it a little choke, but I'm not going to probably need it for long, if at all. There we go. On. Let all the air out. I'm going to take a look at this right here. Looks like the smoke is coming from here after all. It's good I pulled that cover off. Let's take a look. Yeah, this is going to require some immediate attention. Take a look at that. I've disconnected the battery for any further work. I already replaced the original harness on a trip to Connecticut. There was a lot of rain and water had gotten in here and collected and heated up and shorted out these contacts. So basically the same thing had happened. So I replaced this and moisture got in again and caused basically the same issue. And this is on the 3 high current wires that go to the coil right here, charging. But yeah, I'm gonna cut this out and fix this. things are already looking better. Here's the side going back up. These are 2 pieces of marine grade heat shrink. This heat shrink has an epoxy inside that binds like a watertight glue when sealed. This is very good stuff. So I made the first union and the inner heat shrink is on, and now I'll put the outer heat shrink over that inner one for extra protection. Took off that useless dust cover, and now it's time to rebuild this harness. And there we go, brand new harness, completed. Just plug everything back in. And there we go, there's the completed repaired harness. Everything looks good. Everything looks nice. I think we're ready to close this up. We're going to tighten down these bolts now with the 12. The clips back in this piece right here. I've reconnected my under tank lighting, which is not standard to this bike. Now I reinstall the old airbox, though not needed. Looks a lot better obviously than just staring at the carburetors. Then the spark plug wire cover bracket right here. Now locks in with the rubber mount. I'm gonna put this piece back on now. There is a bottom to it, right? There is a notch right here on the bottom, so just saying. You see, carb balancing is still a possibility as I have run the hose through the old air filter. We're gonna pop this cover now on this cylinder head. It's just like that. It's starting to look like a respectable motorcycle. Add back this piece of trim right here. Now this metal cover goes back on, remembering that in the 4 screws on the other side are those metal washers that fit inside the rubber. Now I'll place this cover back on. Put this cover back on the battery now. This is my battery tender cable right here that sits out of this cover, and this is the light for that right there. And they just sit just outside this cover like that. And now I'll just put the screw in. Next will be the front seat. Rear seat. And that's it. The motorcycle is completely reassembled. I hope you found this reassembly tutorial helpful for the VSTAR 1100. Thanks for watching.